So, last energy lunch for 2016, and unfortunately, I don't have much to announce for 2017. It's a little bit up in the air, but just check your normal avenue for getting news about energy lunch, and we might have Jane Lindley coming. She's here in the audience and Steve from Island Power. They were here for the public power, and they are going through the same woes as us as far as trying to purchase their utility. So they'd like to come talk to us about that. So that might be January. We're not sure yet, but stay tuned. Just wanted to mention, I just came back from Iceland. I did one of their classic glacier walks. It was 46 degrees and raining. There's no snow on the ground. They have lost the one glacier that I went on. They've lost 13 meters since May, not even a year. So pretty frightening. Anyway, want to thank our sponsors: Bob Grimm, Alaska Power and Telephone, Andy Cochran from Power Trip, Letitia Huber from Huber's Inn, and Steve Tucker from the Port of Port Townsend for the use of this room. Also want to just remind everybody, please hold your questions till the end. Come up and use the microphone or have me deliver it to you. We just want to get it on the video and allow JJ to get through his presentation. Today we have JJ McCoy, who is the Senior Policy Associate with the Northwest Energy Coalition, and he's also the Legislative Director for the Seattle Electric Vehicle Association. His household went all plug-in with a Nissan Leaf and a Chevy Volt in 2012. He drove his Volt here today. And he routinely adds 8 kilowatts to Seattle City Light's evening peak load. JJ spends his day promoting energy efficiency, transportation electrification, carbon emission reductions, and he spends his evenings questionably karaoke song choices. He has a bachelor's in mathematics and German from Rice University and a master's in public policy from Princeton's Woodrow Wilson School. Please join me in welcoming JJ McCoy.
Hi. And when did you want me to stop? Yeah, I'll take you up on that. So thank you very much for the opportunity to come out here to Port Townsend. It was a lovely drive up this morning. I did take the Chevy Volt. I wasn't sure my Nissan Leaf was going to make it without some extended charging rigmarole, probably stopping in Silverdale for a long fast charge there. But the Volt did a lovely job. I got all the way into Jefferson County over the bridge before the gas motor kicked on and then got me the rest of the way here. I'd be curious, just to start off with the group, how many folks here drive a car with a plug today? A fair number of you, okay. And how many of you are thinking about an EV purchase in your near future? Awesome, I'm really glad to hear that. I think it's a really exciting time for electric vehicles. I'm personally very excited about this next generation of long-range, mid-market price cars that are about to hit showrooms. So Chevy just yesterday really delivered their first Chevrolet Bolts in Fremont, California, right in Tesla's backyard. I think that was intentional. And that car gets 238 miles range for a mid-market price point. After federal incentives, you could probably take that home for something around $30,000. I'm really hopeful that the cabs, the Lyfts, the Ubers, all the rideshare type companies are going to make great use of that car, because I think it'll be really serviceable for them. The same way they're using the heck out of the Priuses right now. Tesla is supposed to be, I don't know how many months away with their Tesla Model 3. That'll be also a over 200-mile range mid-market car. And Nissan has said they'll match that also with the next generation Leaf. Not quite sure when. But Chevy's really in the pole position right now, having gotten those cars out onto the streets. So it sounds like this group is pretty dialed into EVs, but just to set the stage and the general swath of transportation electrification that we're currently talking about in utility circles, most people know cars like the Nissan Leaf here, a battery electric vehicle. You see ranges from, again, 84 miles on the low end to the Tesla Model S sedans. It might be 250 or 280 miles range. So that's sort of the current state of the market. Another very serviceable vehicle type is a plug-in hybrid vehicle. It's like my Chevy Volt. I don't know why they did Volt with a V and Volt with a V, but they did, so I have to make sure I'm not talking about the Volt with a V right there. I think that we're going to see a lot of exciting cars in this plug-in hybrid category. VIA Motors has been making a light-duty truck that can do over 30 miles electric and provide power out for your work tools on a work site. So that's one model that's going there. Toyota Prius recently announced the Prius Prime will have about 20 miles electric range before it then kicks into hybrid operation like the Priuses do today. I think that's going to be a really nice entrant. Honda is supposed to be out soon with the Honda Clarity plug-in hybrid. Really happy to see Honda on the scene, a nice high volume, very value manufacturer there. Chevy's got the new Volt out that'll do 53 miles on a charge before switching into hybrid operation and getting 42 miles per gallon efficiency after that. So I think those are fantastic performance stats and certainly a really valuable model. But we're also hoping to see transportation electrification move out of just road vehicles and into or individual road vehicles and into all these other segments as well. You see companies doing short-haul sort of delivery vans. Electric forklifts is a category that's, I think, pretty well along. And then transit buses are ready for prime time. King County Metro has 3 of these Proterra electric, all battery electric transit buses, and they're in model and fleet testing now. My understanding is transit agencies all over the country are looking at this as a mode that they really like to get into next, both for the fuel savings, since the electricity is so much cheaper than the diesel they're burning today, but also for their carbon emissions and air quality goals there. So again, most people know the Nissan Leaf or the Tesla Model S sedan, but there really is a whole range of other application of electric technology that's also of interest here. Now, you may know a little bit about charging. One of the questions I get a lot is, how long does it take to charge your car? And it's a big it depends. There's a lot of different charging modes. They have different costs. They have different speeds. A lot of folks, when they get an EV, particularly if they get a plug-in hybrid, can do well with what they call level 1 charging. So the benefit of that is it's free. You don't need any extra special equipment, just the cord that comes with the car, and then you can plug that into your wall plug at your home garage or carport. The downside is it's slow. So my Nissan Leaf would take probably about a day to go from fully empty to fully charged on level 1 charging. But if you're just commuting to work, 15, 20 miles back and forth each day, certainly level 1 charging on your home electric rates can be one of the most economical modes there. A lot of folks, myself included, go ahead and install what they call a level 2 charging rig in their home garage. This can do 200. It's like uses like a dryer plug. It uses 240 volt power, and there's a variety of charge speeds within the level 2 standard. My first Leaf pulled 15 amps and was charging at 3.3 kilowatts. That took about 8 hours to go from completely empty to completely full. The Nissan Leafs they're selling now have double that power rate. They're up at 6.6 kilowatts, so you can go from empty to full in about 4 hours. Tesla, of course, because Tesla does everything bigger and grander, they're up at the 40 amp standard with 10 kilowatts, expandable to 80 amps at 19.2. So if you want your Tesla to be charged up at home in a shorter amount of time, you can go ahead and invest in that. That's probably going to cost you a few $1,000s for power supply and charging rig to get that installed in your home, but it does give you speed. And then along the highways, you'll see what they call DC fast charging, and there's a variety of standards there. That is direct current. Not every vehicle can do DC fast charging, and unfortunately we're in a standards war. It's kind of like the VHS Betamax. There's a bunch of different DC fast charge standards out there. Tesla has its own proprietary DC fast standard. Nissan and Japanese manufacturers are on what they call the CHAdeMO standard, and then the American car makers like Chevy and the Europeans, they're on the CCS combo plug standard. So unfortunately, we're hoping that standards war will resolve itself and simplify life for everyone. But the basic idea is that you could pull up to a restaurant or someplace by the highway on your trip and go from 0 to 80% charged in under 30 minutes. I will say the power levels keep getting larger. So when I made this slide, most of the highest charge standard I knew was 100 kilowatts. Since then, the standards organizations have put out a 150 kilowatt standard, and they're talking about a 350 kilowatt standard. So as these batteries get bigger, as the cars get longer ranges, particularly in the highway fast charging mode, having really high-powered fast charging is something that's on folks' radar now. Mostly what you're going to see around Washington are 50 kilowatt stations at the West Coast Green Highway along I-5 there primarily. And then the bus charging standards that I mentioned, the rig there at King County Metro uses an overhead 500 kilowatt super high power charging standard and charging rig, and the idea is that the bus can do its route, maybe about 18 miles, and roll up to the back to the base, and in 6 minutes it can recharge enough to sort of do the route again. So a lot of transit routes are actually not super high mileage before they're coming back to a central base, and many of the current Proterra buses. With buses, you can either have a small battery and try to minimize weight that way and have frequent charging, or you can have a very large battery and try to maximize range. So I think what you'll see with a lot of the transit agencies are the sort of small battery solution with very high-powered charging. So I just wanted to say a little bit about Northwest Energy Coalition. You might be familiar with us. We've been around for 30 years now. It was a group of folks that were interested in the Northwest Power Act of 1980, which set the region on regional power planning and energy conservation as a way to avoid, a ton of new investment in new plants. I think nuclear plants were the flavor of the day back then. And so our folks have been working energy efficiency, renewable energy, and regional sort of rational power planning that whole time. Transportation electrification has been kind of a new recent focus for us, and it used to be that load building, the term load building was a dirty word in utility terms. The utilities weren't supposed to engage in load building activities. They were supposed to be conserving electricity. But I deliberately put building load in the title of my talk here because it's no longer a dirty word. There's actually a good load out there, load that has a bunch of benefits, can benefit the utility business model, can benefit carbon emissions, can save users money on their fueling. And so I have a couple copies of a research paper. It's also up on our website at nwenergy.org, just outlining sort of the full swath of benefits that transportation electrification can bring to the electric utilities and how the utilities may begin to orient their business models around these benefits. So one of the first ones you get to is that transportation electrification offers the chance to utilize our existing grid assets more fully and possibly put a bit of downward pressure on rates. So Pacific Northwest National Lab did a study a while back saying that if we can get people charging at off-peak times when the grid's not already maximized, that we could electrify a couple of million vehicles in the region without adding a single bit of utility assets to the mix. So there really is quite a bit of headroom, particularly in the overnight off-peak charging space. So a lot of folks worry about utility impacts, distribution impacts, generation impacts, but nationally, a little less so in the Northwest, but still, there's significant headroom, and when you use those utility assets more fully, one of the benefits you have is that if you have the same assets and you can sell a few more kilowatt hours on the margin, then the price per kilowatt hour can go down a bit. And there's a utility group with several of the utilities, Puget Sound Energy, Seattle City Light, I think Snowpud, Tacoma, they're all collaborating on some business model studies right now showing, and I got some numbers here from the study that Seattle City Light did, when a new car plugs into their system, they see $1,250 of net new revenue. This is net of all their generation and transmission costs. So that's potentially a nice bit of headroom that can either lower rates for all ratepayers, or if you flip that on its head, that becomes maybe their budget constraint, where they could spend up to $1,250 going out trying to acquire that next new transportation customer, and all of their other ratepayers would still be strictly better off. So these studies are trying to sort of map out the win-win space. It's going to vary a little bit by utilities with their costs and their rates, but I think for every electric utility, there's going to be a fair amount of win-win space when new transportation loads connect to their systems. They've also modeled transit buses, so when one of those Proterra buses comes online, the utility can expect to see $120,000 of net new revenue over the bus's life, and an electric forklift might be $15,000. Makes me gotta wonder how much they're running those forklifts, because that seems like a lot, but. In all those cases, I think what you're seeing is more and more utilities nationally realizing, hey, there's a really attractive business model. In the background, energy efficiency has been doing such a great job. Seattle right now, Seattle's booming. There's cranes in the sky. There's new people. There's new buildings. Seattle City Lights electric load is actually falling. And that's one of the things that's really remarkable, is the building codes have gotten stricter. The LED lights have us all using way less energy. For all of those conservation reasons, utilities are seeing flat or declining loads, and I think they're starting to perk up to the idea that transportation could be really an exciting new market for them. One of the things I wanted to delve into with the Northwest Energy Coalition is the idea of conserving energy, and it's a little tricky because normally we think of conserving energy in terms of conserving kilowatt hours, but with transportation electrification you have to kind of go in a cross-fuel perspective, and you might be adding kilowatt hours but still using less total energy in all forms, and that's very much the case with electric cars. When you move from the internal combustion engine over to the electric motor, the electric motor is just a far more efficient device. So these are the energy maps that the Washington Commerce Department puts out for the state, and on the left you've got all the different sort of sources of energy that we use, and on the right you have all the different end uses, where there's transportation, industrial, commercial, residential. Transportation is the big kahuna of waste. Most of what you put in your tank goes out the side of the engine in terms of heat, and only maybe about 25% of that energy that's present in the gasoline actually is propelling you forward in the car. And that's why the electric motor is so much more exciting. So what I've taken here is the miles per gallon, or in the electric car, miles per gallon equivalent terms from EPA's car ratings. And just to show you that really the electric motor can take you 4 times as far on the same amount of energy as what's in your tank of gasoline right now. And it's that conservation is really kind of spectacular. So you have to start converting from energy sources. So one thing to remember is that a gallon of gasoline has about 120 megajoules of energy in it. So does 33rd and a third kilowatt hours. So that's not an equivalence everyone thinks about every day, but if you want to geek out on the energy stuff, a gallon of gasoline is roughly equal to about 33rd and a third kilowatt hours. But if you put everything in terms of megajoules, your 15 miles per gallon gas guzzler might be using 8 megajoules to take you a mile down the road. Your average car maybe a little under 5. The best in class, Toyota Prius hybrid up at 50 miles per gallon might be using 2.5. All of your electric cars are, less than half of the Prius energy use for energy in the tank. I used to say the BMW i3 at 124 miles per gallon was the total efficiency champ. I love this car. It's got the carbon fiber lightweight body the carbon fiber made out at Moses Lake, and really is the most efficient car on the road. I need to update my slide though, because Toyota just did the one better. The new Prius Prime, apparently when it's in electric mode, which is only 20 miles, mind you, is even up at 133 miles per gallon equivalent. So, imagine if we were driving cars with 130 miles per gallon. I mean, it would be just a far more efficient system. We can get there in equivalent energy terms with electric motors there. So the reason that I get up in the morning and come out to events like this is really for the carbon emissions reductions potential. We have an enormous resource here in the Northwest of low carbon energy sources with our hydropower base, the wind and solar that's coming on. Seattle City Light also has some landfill methane and other sort of renewable sources like that. And electric vehicles, because our grid is so clean, particularly here, electric vehicles offer just an enormous opportunity to reduce the state's emissions. And if you look at the emissions maps, the largest share of Washington's carbon emissions right now are in transportation. And that share will get even larger when the last two coal plants in Centralia close down in 2020 and 2025. So really, if you're looking to reduce carbon emissions in the state, transportation is where you need to go. And people keep asking me about, well, what about the life cycle? What about the manufacturing? So I found a really great study out of Carnegie Mellon that shows, how many grams of carbon per distance different vehicle types put out. So a conventional gasoline car might have, a certain amount of carbon from the manufacturing, a certain amount of carbon from making the fuel, and then carbon from burning the fuel. A hybrid can certainly reduce the making and burning part of that, although manufacturing is the same. What's interesting about electric vehicles is the manufacturing is a little higher. So by manufacturing a lithium-ion battery, there is a little bit of carbon footprint there. Of course, if we can get the manufacturers to use clean energy, then that will go down as well. So that's where that mission is. But what this study was looking at is, even if you're just running an electric vehicle on, say, combined cycle natural gas power, even across the entire life cycle of the vehicle and its fuel, you can see an immediate 40% reduction in carbon emissions by switching to the electric motor. And in the Northwest, where we've got mostly renewable energy sources, you're going to be closer to an 85% reduction because, we have very little coal, we have a bit of gas, but mostly we've got hydro, mostly we've got wind and to a lesser extent solar. So really a very dramatic reduction in our transportation carbon emissions. And EPRI, one of this research group, estimated that you'd have to have a car doing 250 miles per gallon, a gas car, in order to get sort of the equivalent emissions performance that we have here in Washington and Oregon. So we have a tremendous resource, and leveraging that resource for transportation is really kind of what got me into this game, and I think really exciting. And then among the other benefits, and these are things that we hope our regulators and our air quality folks will keep in mind, is cars and buses and trucks, they emit a lot of different harmful pollutants, whether it's nitrogen oxides or ozone or particulates. And you have none of those tailpipe emissions. And again, because our electricity sources are so clean, you have just a dramatic reduction in the air quality impacts. And then there's been some studies from some macroeconomic firms showing that if you have people save money on fueling, and I'll have to talk about that more in a bit, then the dollars that you're spending on gasoline, if you spend them pretty much anywhere else in the economy, they perform better in the economy, generating more jobs. Turns out petroleum is one of the worst job-generating and economic activity sectors of our economy. So to the extent that we can save money on petroleum and spend it on haircuts, dinners out, anything else, we are doing better for our locals' economies. And then the other thing I like to remind is that EVs are fun. We talk about the EV grin. Every time I get in a gas car and I have to drive it, I just hate the slow response. I'm so used to the instant torque and great acceleration of my Leaf. So go well, and a lot of folks are just going to have a lot of fun with these cars. So we have about 18,000 plug-in vehicles registered in Washington. I know Sonia used to live in the San Juan Islands. I mentioned, King County, of course, has a lot there. But if you go per capita basis, San Juan County is coming up strong number 2. I think an island is a really good place to have an EV, given the range you can drive. But yeah, you're seeing more and more of them. and particularly along the I-5 corridor, it becomes actually a really good commute and city-to-city vehicle. But we need to do a whole lot more. I've got some charts here from this deep decarbonization study that was done out of California. This is showing basically the year-to-year sales and what that does to the vehicle stock. And in order to meet our carbon goals for 2050 and really decarbonize this whole sector, what they're showing is that gas car sales are going to need to fall pretty quickly to low levels. And that plug-in hybrid and electric vehicle sales are going to need to be really the dominant vehicle sold, within a decade here, in order with stock turnovers, in order to meet those decarbonization targets. The city of Seattle has set a goal recently of having 30% of all vehicles registered be plug-in vehicles by 2030. It's a really ambitious goal. They're going to have to sell vast majority of vehicles with plugs, within 5 years, I think, in order to get there. So we're working with the Seattle City Council to try to come up with policies to support that. When I gave this presentation earlier, I had a handout. I apologize I don't have it today. If you want to know who's managed to do that kind of vehicle adoption rate, it's Norway. I went to a conference in Portland a couple years ago, and this Norway parliament minister was talking about all the different policies that Norway has done. If you go to Oslo, it's apparently Tesla Central. They've got EVs everywhere. The parking's free, the charging's free, the bridge and tunnel tolls are free. You can get in the bus lanes. They're losing their shirts. They're talking about they're going to have to dial this back because it's costing them too much. But for the moment, I mean, they're just full court press on promoting electric versus gas cars. They've got a majority now of the vehicles sold in Norway are electric. So if you're looking for a template for how to get there and how to really push the policies to get people there, that's your template right there. But back in the utility space, I mentioned a lot of the utilities are growing increasingly interested in marketing to this load, finding business models that lets them participate in the transportation load. And you're seeing different approaches. I often say it feels kind of like the Wild West right now. There's a bunch of different ideas and a bunch of different modes and a bunch of different business relationships. Pretty much every combination you could possibly think of is being tried somewhere right now, and I don't know that anyone thinks that any one mode is really the best right answer at the moment. So California a couple years ago passed SB 350. It told their utilities, get firmly into the transportation market, help us meet our carbon and air quality goals. Plan for it in your IRPs. The utilities, the three investor-owned utilities, all have multi-$100-million charging infrastructure proposals in at their regulators right now. They're fussing a little over the whys and wherefores. They've been at that for a year or two. But really the signal in California has been green light, utilities get into the space, provide all this charging infrastructure for your customers. And on the flip side, California has carbon cap and trade revenue, and they're using those in a heavy way to subsidize the vehicle purchases for clean vehicles. They've got a nice low-income program where if you're low income and in poor air quality area, they're putting substantial amounts of money, up to $12,000, on the hood of a low-emission vehicle. So California's, I think, really got the full court press going there. A couple years ago, Vermont did something interesting. They passed a law saying their utilities could go target carbon emissions reductions among their ratepayers with a variety of approaches, but they could include transportation electrification. And I think for the utilities, that'll be one of the most attractive modes. I haven't checked in with them for a while, but I'm really curious to see where that'll develop, the idea that the utility is now in the business of reducing carbon emissions, especially in a way that sort of builds its own business. Here in Washington, we had a law that was sponsored by Representative Chad Mogendance out from Issaquah. He's a Republican and a BMW i3 driver and a Puget Sound Energy customer. And he said one day, and this is all his idea, he had to bring the utilities along. He said, "Hey, I want my utility to be able to sort of go into this market and the way they do other things." So in 2015, he got House Bill 1853 through the legislature, and we're glad he did. And it allows the investor-owned utilities to install charging infrastructure behind the customer meter and earn an incentive rate of return on that. They put a rate impact cap. We're still talking about exactly how that rate impact cap is going to work. But Avista Utilities out in Spokane recently got approval for a pilot program. They're going to do a couple hundred vehicle charging businesses and some public stations there. So they're in the middle of implementing and installing their program right now. We're still waiting for Puget Sound Energy to do. They've got a little $500 rebate program, but they've not as yet utilized their authority under 1853. They've been a little more cautious than I expected. And then I've been on the Amtrak train down to Salem a few times in the past year because Oregon also passed a law. Mostly, you may have heard the coal to clean law. So their law said that by 2030 or 2035, their Oregon ratepayers won't be paying for coal anymore, and it puts the utilities on a path to doing a lot more renewables there. But the second part of that law was that it also authorized the Oregon electric utilities to go into transportation with transportation electrification plans. They're all supposed to be filing their plans by the end of this year, and then the commission will be reviewing those. So interesting to see how the Oregon utilities move with those. Let's see. One of the themes, and I sort of originally gave this talk for or wrote this talk for an event around public utilities. One of the things we've definitely been noticing in state after state and place after place is that the lawmakers start with the investor-owned utilities. And in some places, that's most of the ballgame. But here in Washington, you know, they're only half the market, and people like Jefferson PUD and Seattle City Light and Tacoma Power are really you know, major players in this space. So at the moment, we've got a bit of a disconnect. We've got some authority in the investor-owned utility space, and less so in the consumer-owned utility space. And it threw up some of these BPA maps. You know, pretty much everything that isn't hash marked is a public utility here in Washington. So really, most of the states being served by PUDs and municipals. So where does that leave us? I also have Oregon. Right now, Seattle City Light and Puget Sound Energy are convening a group of utilities that are talking about ways to get additional authority for the publics. Just to talk a little about what some of the publics are doing that I know of. So the collaboration group I just mentioned, they got those business case analyses going on right now. The one that showed $1,250 of net new revenue for City Light. Chelan, Snohomish, Tacoma Power, they're all hiring the same firm to do similar business cases. Might be a good, interesting project for Jefferson as well if they're interested in sort of mapping out sort of what the business case is for transportation electrification. Seattle City Light is moving further into the electrification space. They've got a budget proposal approved that they'll be doing a network of 20 DC fast charging units in their service territory, which is Seattle and a little bit north and south. So they'll be doing a public-facing DC fast network. They're also talking about doing a residential program, but there's some legal issues, which I'll get to in a minute. And then there's a group out in Benton, Franklin, Richland that is also looking at doing charging programs and potentially applying for some of the funds that might be available with WashDOT for highway corridor charging. So again, I sense gathering interest, although all the utilities I think are still early in the mode of figuring out how this is going to work for them and how this is going to, you know, exactly how their involvement is going to be structured. So particularly for municipals, I'm actually not quite sure how much this applies to PUDs. Washington has kind of a wacky constitution that has very strict prohibitions on lending public funds or to gift of public funds or lending of credit. I'm told way back when it had something to do with keeping the railroads in check. They didn't want the railroads to basically use government to tax the rest of us and use our money that way. But particularly for municipal utilities that are sort of bound by these municipal structures, A lot of programs that are normally done in other places end up running into gift of public funds issues. And in particular, my folks, my predecessors at Northwest Energy Coalition had to organize and amend the state constitution to allow energy efficiency programs to be done with public dollars. So they basically went to the Constitution and said, okay, you can't give public funds, but it's okay if you're doing energy conservation work. Now, this particular constitutional amendment has been amended several times since 1979, but one of the things that happened in the last amendment, and I'm told this had something to do with electric utilities and gas utilities poaching each other's customers, but it's one of the things that got added in the last amendment was, okay, you can do conservation, but it shall not be used for anything which results in a conversion from one energy source to another. That has the lawyers saying, well, I don't know about transportation because you're converting from petroleum to electricity. So Seattle City Light has been talking to Olympia about possibly solving this issue and giving them more of a clear legal path to doing this. I know they're working with Snohomish PUD. I don't know if they're talking to Jefferson, but also talking to Tacoma Power about going in on a bill this coming session. Last time they did drop a preliminary bill. It didn't really go anywhere. It was House Bill 2966. But the idea is to put the municipals and the PUDs kind of on the same footing that the investor-owned utilities got with that bill in 2015, giving them a sort of firm path to get into this transportation space with rate dollars. So we will be working together in the coming session to try to give the municipals parity with the IOUs. And then that's most of it. I did want to talk a little bit more detail about the business case, and I'm completely stealing the slides of EE3, Energy Environmental Economics. They're the ones who did the study for Seattle City Light. Great folks. They're out of San Francisco. They worked with all the California utilities. You know, as I look at transportation, as I look at these utility benefits, there's a variety of different cost tests that get applied in a regulatory context, probably a little different for publics, but in an investor-owned regulatory context, you know, you can look at a total resource cost. Will the key question there is, will the energy costs in the region decrease or increase? You can look at a ratepayer impact measure and, like, okay, regardless of what this does for other costs, what does this do to rates in particular? And then also a participant cost test. But by all of these metrics, transportation shows up. And now I have to apologize. $12.50 is the number you should keep in mind at our Washington prices. Everything's more expensive in California, so don't think you're going to get $60 to $100 worth of net benefit here. This is California prices. But you know, the idea is, you know, when you are doing transportation, you get a federal tax credit. You save a ton on gas. You reduce carbon. There might be some petroleum security benefit. I guess they've valued there. On the flip side, the cars cost a bit more. You know, the electric cars still are on the order of 10 grand more expensive than their conventional gas counterparts. There's federal incentives and also no state sales tax to try to help with that. You have to buy charging equipment in many cases. You got to supply the energy. But in any case, this is kind of a total resource cost test framework. Mostly because of the gasoline savings, there is always a fair, healthy, you know, just general total resource savings from this transportation electrification. And E3 really has been doing the pioneering work, sort of mapping all of this win-win space out for electric utilities. And this was, again, it's a little bit busy, but this was more detail on the study that they did for Seattle City Light. They looked at a bunch of different cases of electrification. They did a bunch of scenarios. You know, suppose we have really high adoption. Suppose we have really high gas and carbon prices. Suppose the charging stations cost us a bunch. They did a bunch of scenarios. But you can see in each of these cases, you know, they have either scores or hundreds of millions of dollars worth of net benefit over the life of these cars from this transportation electrification endeavor. So really a potential business case for the not just for the electric utility, but for the community as well. So that's really most everything. I just wanted to point you to some resources. Northwest Energy Coalition website, we've got my study up there. We recently did a resolution endorsing a greater utility role in transportation electrification among our membership, and our membership includes utilities and people suing the utilities and low-income advocates, and so it really is kind of an interesting crowd. And then I've also got some links there to some of the major studies that I draw on for my research. And if you're interested in seeing what Avista has done with their program, like I say, that's the first major program that's been approved through the Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission, and you can read up on the details there. So with that, questions? Well, thank you.
Do you have any more in-depth information on Norway and how they're losing their shirt and how they tend to stay warm?
The only thing I have is a slide that Norwegian minister put up at the conference, but he was basically showing how they've ramped up all of their policies. Again, charging's free, parking's free, the tolls are free, and then he didn't give euro amounts or whatever on what that's costing them, but did have a schedule for over the next several years. They're planning on dialing that back because they realize they can't be doing that forever. If nothing else, people were congesting the bus lanes because all of these electric cars are now getting into their bus lanes, and the purpose of the bus lane is gone if you have too much of that.
Currently, the state of Washington penalizes people who drive all electric cars because they don't get the gas tax money for road maintenance. How do you see other groups handling that?
Yeah, so it's an interesting issue. Over and over we hear, oh, but electric cars don't pay for the roads. In fact, it was just in the Tacoma News Tribune the other day, and I wrote a nasty letter to the reporter and the person who said it. And in fact, yes, we do pay for the roads because it took our legislators all of 2 minutes to figure out another way to ding us to pay for the roads. So when I register my Nissan Leaf, it's actually up to $150 now. So there's a $150 annual registration fee that only applies to electric vehicles. If you look at the legislature, when they raised that, they also were raising the gas tax. So it's about in the zone of what a typical efficiency car driving a typical distance might pay. My SEVA members hate it, of course, with a purple passion because they're like, I'd be driving my Prius 4,000 miles a year if it wasn't for this Leaf. So I'm getting hosed. I will say the legislature appropriated $1 million out of that proceeds for highway fast charging, and we're expecting WashDOT to have RFPs on the streets within the next month or two to implement more highway fast charging. It is tops on my list in talking to Olympia this coming session to make sure that many more millions after that one of that EV fee actually go to support charging infrastructure, because that's really if you're going to make us pay for it, and particularly, with EVs only being, we're less than 0.5% of the vehicles on the road now, we're not impacting your road budgets. Let's build this market a little first. Yeah.
JJ, great presentation. Really liked the policy analysis for us. And I thought the slide with how many electric vehicle car sales we need to have a significant positive impact on the carbon reduction. Do you know anything about what the car manufacturers are actually projecting their sales to be and how it compares to this?
I don't know what their projections are. The Obama administration, when they launched the most recent EV effort, we're hoping for 1 million vehicles by now, maybe, or 2018, and we're short of that. It was easier to sell electric cars when gas costs $4.50 a gallon. It's a little harder at $2.50. And the studies I've seen show that gasoline price, unfortunately, is one of the major factors that are driving people to hybrids and electrics and things like that. So I don't know. I mean, whether it's for U.S. Emission standards or for European emission standards, it seems like a day doesn't go by that I don't see another new manufacturer announcing they're going to have another all-electric line. Like Mercedes is talking about having several, BMW as well. Honda's getting in the game, as I mentioned. I didn't even mention Chrysler, a vehicle I'm very excited about for van pools and other community transit, the Chrysler Pacifica plug-in hybrid. They had one at EV Roadmap last summer, and 30 miles electric range, and seats 8, or you could do a van pool or a large family. So you're seeing more of the vehicle segments fill out. You're seeing more manufacturers announce. Part of the thing is we're kind of in a race. Batteries are getting more energy dense. Battery prices are coming down. I think the people who are leading in the EV space, they're probably losing money today. But as that battery component, and particularly because the fuel, I don't think I said this clearly enough, the fuel savings are really spectacular. I mean, I probably save $1,000 a year over what I was paying in gasoline. I mean, that definitely adds up. And so in a total cost of ownership framework, an electric can be just the winner on price and total cost of ownership, certainly for a fleet manager if they're doing that analysis. But I don't know what their projections are. You see different projections, even like with the oil industry, wondering how much of a factor is this going to be. I certainly hope it takes off on curves like this, and I think if we see cars like the Bolt that have huge range at a mid-market price, you could start to get a big adoption uptick. But the hybrids are only a certain swath now too, even though the efficiencies really speak for themselves. I don't know why people in this country like to drive huge trucks so they're not hauling anything, but they apparently do. I'm from Texas. I know they really like to do that. So if you've got any ideas for having people not want to do that, I'm all ears.
They like the sound.
Yeah.
I heard your new general manager Larry speak yesterday at a breakfast.
Oh, okay.
And he's really big on microgrids.
Okay.
And I'm just wondering if you could speak to the value of EVs within microgrids.
With the grid.
Maybe a community.
Sure. Yeah, so there's a lot of technical potential for electric vehicles as kind of a battery storage or a charge management or a load management. I didn't really emphasize it so much in this talk because I think, first of all, we're going to need to get the vehicles at a much larger scale before you're going to see those utility applications kind of come into range. I haven't heard of anything particularly within the microgrid context, but some of the things people are talking about, I think step one in charge management is just if you're a utility that has a peak capacity constraint, you're going to want to manage people to, give them a signal to charge overnight to where they're not exacerbating any of your peak needs. So what seems to work very well there is a time of use rate and some kind of price signal. In California, they've got actually a pretty healthy differential on the super off-peak rate versus the on-peak rate, and the charging data shows that people pay attention. Every car has a charge timer. You can say, charge at midnight, and you can leave your garage when you get home, and the car will take care of it. And so, certainly, those time of use signals, I think, are very effective in getting people to charge at certain times of the day. Another aspect that people are interested in is using charging signals as a way to align these new loads with variable renewable generation. So it might be sort of daytime, maybe workplace charging if you've got a big solar generation peak, or again, it might be overnight if you've got sort of wind generation that's not being soaked up with regular demand. So whether it's a price signal or some kind of other more techno charge management protocol. They've talked about charge management protocols where you basically tell the protocol, have my vehicle charged to 80% by this time, and then the utility has some ability to figure out what's the most cost-effective way to get you there with those parameters. That's certainly technically possible. I think the electronics and all the networking and the programming to make that happen, I haven't yet seen a business case where the infrastructure you need to get that functionality is going to be kind of worth the incremental, benefit that you would see to the utility. And then beyond that, there's a whole lot of vehicle-to-grid technical possibility there. I know Nissan's testing some vehicles that have home battery backup capability. So, and certainly a lot of people who built their own electric cars have built that function in as well. So if you have an outage, your car could power your house for a few hours. you know, and tide you over until the utilities back up. Same function with the Tesla Powerwall. You know, if you could buy other home batteries that have kind of a backup function there. And then in the other sort of techno realm, people have talked about using electric cars, particularly aggregated up to, you know, megawatt loads, as ways of doing grid services. There's a bunch of, and I'm still learning about this field, there's a bunch of very esoteric grid services. They've got to manage supplies and demands on large and small timescales, and there's various ways the utilities do that. And you could potentially be using the batteries or the charging power levels of the aggregated transportation loads as a way to do those grid balancing functions. Again, the business case I haven't seen yet, whether transportation and all the cost of aggregation is going to pencil out versus the current. I mean, my understanding is that's often done with hydro now. You can dial up hydro up and down a little bit, you know, and to provide those services, and whether you'll be able to do it at a cost competitive rate with these aggregated transportation loads, I think really remains to be seen. So,
back to the question of manufacturers standpoint, we're looking at the term compliance cars or compliance vehicles.
Yeah.
When driven, particularly in California, where they have standards for manufacturers' entire fleet that they sell every year,
yeah.
They can sell more of those high-profit, you know, gas-guzzling vehicles, if they can sell more EV.
Right.
Like the new Chevy Volt, which is California is a compliant state. Washington is not a compliant state, but Oregon, California, and a couple of others. So
There's about 8 or 9 total. Yeah.
sell them because it hasn't been profitable. But it's good that California and some states put that standard in.
Sure. Yeah, so Washington is not what they call a ZEV state, the Zero Emission Vehicle Mandate state. I would love for us to be a ZEV state. The Governor Inslee proposed making us a ZEV state in 2015. You could have heard the crickets from the legislature. They just weren't going to take him up on that one. Let's see. What's interesting, though, is, so yes, the ZEV states are certainly very important in driving the manufacturers to do a wider range of vehicles. Tesla has made an interesting business model, and since they're 100% electric, of course, they're exceeding the mandate by a large margin, and they can sell the excess as credits to the other manufacturers. So I'm told that's actually pretty central to their business model currently, and that Chevy may get into that same business. If Washington were a ZEV state, I think we would certainly see a wider range of vehicles. My EV geeks at CEVA are always out there looking for the rare bird car that you can't get here. So we've got one guy that has, oddly, Clint Eastwood's Fiat 500 electric. Apparently Clint drove it for some charity thing in California, and then our guy Roger went down there and bought it. It's signed by Clint Eastwood. It's a little random. And then, you know, you see cars like the Mercedes B-Class electric, also not sold here, but we've seen a few on the road, and one of our members has one. I think it was some of the other major ones. There is a dealership in Seattle, Paramount Motors. They're in SoDo. If you're looking for one of those rare birds, they seem to be making a business out of taking the second sale of many of these cars that aren't available in Washington and reselling them here, and they seem to be doing a brisk business on that. So I'll also mention screaming deals right now on used EVs. If you're looking to get your feet wet on that, there's a lot of cars that are coming off 2- and 3-year leases, you know, not super high miles, and, you know, you can pick them up for in the 12,000 to 13,000 range. So really pretty good deals there.
So my question to Jake falls out of your point about the utilities not being in the load building industry historically. In fact, 30 years ago, they started being pushed to bring down their load, bring down their
Sure.
right, with energy conservation. So,
Which is working great. Yay.
So my thinking is this is really a transportation issue, and transportation is generally managed at the state level. Look at how we fund our highways and our roads, and things filter down. And now we're asking the utilities potentially to play a role in policy development of a network, a charging station. How much guidance is the state providing, or how much has there been an attempt to move the state towards where it's kind of thinking about this in beyond the barriers of a PUD limit or a county limits orientation, but more look at the state where we really need to think about how transportation vehicles move.
Yeah, it's a good question. So the state of Washington participated early and vigorously with the West Coast Electric Highway. And one of the things the governor's folks and the WashDOT folks have been looking about is ways to build a comprehensive charging network to get all the major highway corridors in the state. And utilities, where they have service territory and those things may well be participants in those projects. One of the things we're seeing is the utilities can participate on sort of the line extension costs and some of the power supply setup costs for those charging stations, and then maybe an operator would operate the station. And so there's certainly, I think, will be opportunities for the utilities to play, where they have highway frontage. The thing that I see the utilities being perhaps most involved in is residential charging setup. So vast majority of charging events, over 80%, happen overnight at home. And EV adoption to date has been largely a single-family home phenomenon because it's been really hard to get those apartments and condos, wired up at the parking place. You could be talking $10,000, $20,000 just to get started on getting the power supply to the right spot. And I know various condo boards have been debating this, and apartment managers, I think, have a hard time thinking about writing checks that big for such an amenity. That's one of the things the California utilities are doing really vigorously. Is they've got wiring up multifamily dwellings as a really main mission for them. I think it ends up being one of the more high cost segments for them to serve, but they're really looking to throw their utility capital at that. So I know the state has certainly lots of vision of electrifying fleets, electrifying transit, getting local fleets. There's a push now to get local government fleets more electrified. Governor Inslee has tasked his state government departments to have, I think, 20% electric procurement next year. So really getting them there, and they're going to have to build charging equipment as they go. So there's a fair amount of state vision there, and also state visioning of sort of highway corridors. Frankly, I think we're all still kind of groping around all these different players, trying to figure out, who's going to do what in the space. It really is kind of Wild West at the moment.
So my question is, are there any highway quick charge stations on I-90 at this point? And if so, where are they?
On I-90, yes. I've used the one, so there's an EVgo station in North Bend. And I shouldn't tell the story, but I almost completely ran out of juice in my car on New Year's Day, driving 70 miles an hour in 15-degree temperatures up Snoqualmie Pass. I really wouldn't recommend that in a Leaf. I wouldn't do that again. But I unfortunately left North Bend without a full charge, thinking, oh, I'll make it. There is a state highway corridor charging up at Snoqualmie Pass. Unfortunately, that station wasn't operational, and they plowed snow all around it. So we get there, and I'm like, oh, my car's not going to make it. And this guy in a Tesla, his family was off skiing. He had dug the charging station out of the snow and called the company 3 times trying to get the thing working. So we were both desperate to try to get our vehicles charged. But yeah, I really shouldn't tell that story. It doesn't put EVs in a positive light, but that does happen. And then I think it goes as far as Wenatchee, but then it doesn't, the network definitely doesn't carry through all the way to Spokane.
So there's another one in Wenatchee?
You can certainly get over the pass, and then I know there's one in Ritzville, which is off by itself. But yeah, I think those are the I-90 ones. And then Avista, as part of its residential program, or as part of its charging program, they're now getting started with doing Pullman to Spokane, and maybe some points north to south there. So they're starting to cover the eastern part of the state as well. But out here on the peninsula, like I say, your last gas for how many miles is kind of Silverdale at the YMCA there. I know I sat and did a charge that time we went to Port Angeles. And I think the Nissan dealership in Port Angeles now has a DC fast up, although I haven't been there recently. That's another thing you're seeing is the vehicle manufacturers wanting to sort of goose this network are putting charging station in at the dealerships. It's a bit of a weird place to spend, 20, 30 minutes charging up, but in a pinch, I think a lot of us have used dealership charging ports as well.
Just one more part of this. The crash tracking through the peninsula, I've been working on Mason PD number 3 down in Shelton is actually funding these new fast.
Oh, great.
The site that we've worked on down there. That'll start construction next spring. Tom and I just submitted a new set of EV charging, fast charging locations on the peninsula, Port Townsend, Forks, Port Angeles, Claylock, a couple of other locations going around. Because Volkswagen is offering that money to do this. So we're trying that again. Our federal grant is still pending, and we need to do a big statement. Tesla is building a station out in Claylock that we build this, but let's also step out for the public one. So that's what we
Sure.
That funding with that program. But if you want to find out more on the state program, just Google Washington Electric Vehicle Action Plan.
Yeah.
And you'll see that, not only that map that they have, but you'll see that one of the priority corridors for the state is really the peninsula. And that one is I-90.
Yeah.
Two of the main ways they want to increase this.
Yeah, and we at a meeting this morning we were talking a little about this. There's a bunch of pots of money about to have a free for all, and hopefully some good things will come of it. So you may have heard Volkswagen got dinged pretty hard for their little cheating scandal on air quality. Washington's Ecology Department will be managing, I think, $103 million as part of the air mitigation fund. Up to 15% of that can go for vehicle charging, and so I'm hopeful we'll see some good projects out of that. In addition, Volkswagen had a separate fund that they're managing that's $2 billion nationally. Of course, California grabbed 40% of it because their lawyers were at the table. And Volkswagen is looking very actively for places to do highway border charging, and they're out, beating the bushes right now, so working to get projects going. And I know they've opened more public. In fact, I just got an email the other day. They've just opened a public input process on the Volkswagen ZEV fund. So to the extent that you want to tie into that. Now that one could be interesting because what I'm hearing is that Volkswagen wants to own and operate kind of its own charging network, which didn't make one of the incumbent charging networks very happy. ChargePoint kind of kicked up a bunch of fuss about having Volkswagen being able to do that. But we'll have to see what comes of that. So certainly an opportunity to do projects, but you would then be in business with Volkswagen. So that'd be kind of interesting.
How do we get the roads efficient for the EVs? How can people travel without those concerns? And then that was the first part. The second part is locally, how can we, small businesses, make ourselves available? So buying, say, a charger, type 2.
Right.
But are there possibilities to buy in a group? Can that be, what's the cost of that?
Sure.
And then, where can we people, for instance in lodging, go to advertise that our place does have that service for the EV owners?
Okay, great questions. And I think we talked earlier. I have scheduled vacations and picked hotels based on who has a charger there. I love the Earthbox Inn in Friday Harbor there because they have a couple of charging rigs, and that's where we stay when we're in Friday Harbor. So if you haven't seen it already, there's a great app called PlugShare, plugshare.com. And it is the most comprehensive app that I know. It'll show you all the different types of chargers, where they all are. That is where all the drivers go. If you're planning a trip somewhere and think, okay, I may need to charge during the day, PlugShare is the first place you go. It's crowdsourced, so if you were to put a publicly available charger like say at your hotel, you could list it on PlugShare, put on a picture, say what the rules are, like please check in with the reception desk, or free to everyone, or just limited to guests. You can put all that on there on the app. And so that is really, I think, the main networking tool. Each of the charging station companies, because PlugShare's gotten into the charging business, they're all trying to like do their own little network and their own apps. But I think PlugShare is really still the go-to app. It certainly would be a good amenity for your website. I wholly endorse the idea of having destination. I think there's really sort of two ways to think about it. What are your locals going to want to do every day, day in, day out? That's probably mostly residential, charging at home, maybe a little bit of public to supplement that, maybe a little highway to get out of town. But then for a lot of the public-facing chargers, what are your visitors going to want to do? And I think really the key there is to think about, well, where will the visitors be spending their time, particularly their overnights, and hotel, motel settings. Other long dwell time settings, I think, are really key there. And, putting in a level 2 charger is really not hard. You can get a $500 charging unit at Home Depot. You can order it right there. And it's so-called dumb charger. I mean, it's going to deliver electrons, and that's it. And that's really all you need. And then, it might cost you, depending on your power supply, it might cost you $800 or $1,000 to get the electrician out there to wire up the site. Some sites get more expensive if you have to turn dirt or really bring power from a far-flung place. But in a lot of cases, they can actually be pretty straightforward. Where you start running into additional costs is when you need network functionality, or these things that are, they have a cell signal, they're connected to a network like ChargePoint. They can take payments. If you're part of the ChargePoint network, you can charge $1 or $2 per hour. Some of the ChargePoint stations, when I plug in there, I pay $2 an hour while I'm charging, and that goes through my ChargePoint account. So, you can either do a type of charging structure where you just this is an amenity, and it's going to be a tiny little bit on your electric bill, but it's an amenity you're offering your guests. Or you can go the other route where you put in a station that's again networked and payment enabled, and you can maybe see a little revenue on a charge point.
And this plugin, you just go on the internet and www.plugin.
Yeah, plugshare.com.
I wrote it.
Yeah, plugshare.com, and like I say, it's crowdsourced. So if I'm out and about and I see a charging station and I check PlugShare, it's like it's not listed. I'll go take a picture with my phone and add it there and tell the world, yes, there's a station here. Oh, sorry.
Is the Type 2 charging like wiring up a Type 2 charging? Is that like wiring up a hot water heater or a stove?
It's a dryer plug. It really is no more advanced than that.
A lot of people could do that themselves, couldn't they?
I certainly couldn't. I'd probably fry myself or burn my house down, but there are plenty who could. Yeah, it's funny. I didn't mention Washington's Building Code Council last year passed an EV readiness plank in the new 2016 building code. And so new apartments, condos, and some commercial buildings are going to need to have at least the electrical supply and maybe also the conduit in place to be able to do vehicle charging for 5% of the spaces. So you don't actually have to put the charging in, but when you're designing your building, you just have to kind of be ready for it. It's very cheap at that phase to do the EV readiness. And so we'll have to see as projects come online sort of how that plays out. I think the people designing new buildings are just beginning to grapple with that one. But we've seen codes like that in California, and we now have them here in Washington. Well, I'm sorry, just one more thought on that. I've talked to people who, when they talk about being EV ready, some of the building people freak out and like, oh no, it's going to be crazy, I can't be EV ready. And then when you say, well, it's a dryer plug, and they're like, okay, I can do that. It's not that hard.
I was just going to add to that woman's question, isn't Tesla providing their equipment if you, as a landowner or building owner, will provide the electricity?
I have seen that Tesla has their checkbook out and have been doing some destination charging. We went out to Tofino, Canada last summer, and even though I didn't didn't think my Leaf could make that mission. We took the Volt. I did see Tesla branded charging at several of the resorts out there. I'm a little wary of that in that Tesla has its own proprietary level 2, which makes me sad. But what I saw in those installs is they were doing one proprietary Tesla station and then also one general J1772 that all the cars use. So I wouldn't necessarily be in favor of, I mean, obviously if Tesla's going to write a check, that may be a good deal for you, but putting more proprietary stations out there is not necessarily, I think, the best public amenity. Those Teslas can use the general standards, but nobody else can use the Tesla. That's the problem. It's a bit one way.
Right. But they will provide their hardware for free.
Yeah.
Is my understanding.
Yeah. When I talk to other manufacturers, they're like, yeah, when's Tesla going to run out of money for stuff like that?
January 2017.
Well, I can see why Tesla would do that. The simple answer there is that if you're going to a Tesla station with a Tesla, you know that whoever else is charging, if it's not a Tesla, you're not going to have to wait in line for it.
Mm-hmm.
But meanwhile, when it comes to these destination stations, the higher profile connected stations, how secure are these on the software side?
Well, I don't really know of any software security issues. Certainly if you've got a dumb charger, there's no software to speak of. It's just solid state hardware, delivering electrons to your car. So you see a fair number of those.
Block the door on the outside of it.
Well, I'm sorry?
And block the door on the outside of it. It's on private land.
Yeah. And then, a lot of these stations are sort of cell network connected, and I'm sure we're going to have the same security issues that any internet connected computer would have. So, but I haven't heard of any incidents with that.
Which means, of course, that whatever you're using to pay for the charge is potentially at risk if it's hacked. It also means that if somebody really has an axe to grind and they set things up based upon your account number or payment method, that they can identify you and make sure that you only get the first 2% of your charge, after which it goes dead and isn't discovered till the next morning.
Oh. Yeah, I haven't heard of any nefarious action on that. I mean, there have been phishing attempts at Target and the QFC as well. There's been people skimming credit card data from other retailers. So I guess that's just a general issue at the moment.
But most destination chargers are free.
That's often the case.
You're trying to attract people to go to your destination.
I mean, if you're at Resort X, off by yourself, it's generally, keep in mind the level 2 charging, it's going to take 4-6 hours. So, it's only people probably who are staying there who are going to bother showing up. Now, if you're right downtown, you might get some people just, stopping by to get the juice.